Well, I like redemptive stories. And so for that reason, I like the series Downton Abbey. Any other Downton Abbey people? I'm not recommending it in any way, so just it's okay if you don't like pastor recommendations for things, but I do like it. It's a story about an aristocratic family and their servants in the early 1900s of England. And one of the characters in this story is named Thomas. And Thomas is the villainous foil for a lot of the stories that come, and he's the kind of person you want to hate and you really despise for his malicious, evil, mean-spirited behavior a lot of the time. And yet, a well-written, round character is more human. And so we see, because this is a well-written series, there's moments in the story where we see Thomas's fears, and we see his hopes, and we see him vulnerable. We see him act heroically at times, and we want to hate him, but we also have compassion for him. And this is how it works with round characters, is we end up with villains with redeeming moments and heroes with flaws. They're just a little more real. And I think we like these kind of characters because they're more real to life. Humans are complicated. We're this muddle of contradictions and a jumble of personality and experiences and environment, and we have fears and we have flaws, and things happen to us to change the course of our life. Things that we choose, things that people do to us, things that just happen, people we love, people we lose, and slowly we're shaped into the people that we become. This is the story we're in the middle of. We're in a series called Wrestle to Trust. It's the life of Jacob. And that story really picks up before Jacob. God makes a promise to a guy named Abraham. And Abraham, that he would be the father of a nation. And so he gets this promise that all the world will be blessed through him. And so a promise of land and many children, and yet it's a pretty slow start. He has a son named Isaac, and Isaac gets the same promise. And then eventually, when his wife conceives, there's this reversal. And we heard about this part of the story. God chooses the younger over the older in an act of grace, and the younger is Jacob. He's second born. It's him. And then despite the promise, he schemes to get the birthright from his older brother, and he and his mom elaborately steal the blessing in a made-for-TV movie scene. And of course, the older brother Esau is incensed, he's angry, and so threats are made, and Jacob runs for it under the guise of going to get a wife in the old country. And as he takes off, he falls asleep on the way, and God meets him in this waking dream and speaks these promises over him, and Jacob wakes up and he's in awe, and he marks the place, he sets a pillar, and he makes a vow and says, this will be my God. This is where we pick up our story. Are you ready for more epic story? Oh, it's so good, you guys. If you don't know this story, whoo, it's so good. Okay, chapter 29, verses 1 to 30 today. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the open country with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. Large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We are from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said. "And here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It's not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well, and then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherd. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of his uncle Laban, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He told Rachel he was a relative of her father and the son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Come and tell me what your wages should be." Now, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It's better that I give her to you than some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed and I want to make love to her." Just reading the Bible, people. So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob made love to her. And Laban gave his servant Zilpah to his daughter as her attendant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish this daughter's bridal week, and then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years of work." And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. This is God's word. Woo! Whatever you go through, God is faithful. Whatever you go through, God is faithful. We've all at some point had a God moment, something where just things seem to line up, stuff happens. Maybe you called it that or maybe you didn't. I remember one of those moments for me was I was in Youth with a Mission. I'd left university after 2 years and I was going to go be a missionary. And so in our YWAM class, they said, go and pray and ask the Lord for a nation. And God will give you a nation. He does it. And then you can pray for that nation and maybe you'll be called there. And so I said, okay. And I went up on the mountain. I was overlooking Colorado Springs. And I sat there and I said, okay, God, I'm going to go through the nation. I'm going to start with the ones I want. And we'll get through till you highlight one. So I said, North Korea. I wanted really hard places. Iran. And then I heard, as loud as I've ever heard the Lord speak in my heart, I want you to go back to school to Trinity Western and finish your degree. And I thought, that must be the devil, because I'm praying about a nation the Lord would give me. That's totally off topic. And so I said, I'm going to keep going. Cuba, Yemen. I want you to go back to school and finish your degree at Trinity Western University. And then I was like, this is crazy. No. And then I did what you should not do. And I took my Bible and I opened, I said, God, if this is you, then confirm it to me. Do not do this. It gets very weird most of the time. But this one time I looked down and totally out of context, the verse said, the thing the king asks you to do is very difficult. And I was like, whoa, no, fine. So after my DTS was done, I went back to school. And after a number of months, I met Lauren. And then I thought, wow, this isn't so hard, the thing the king asked me to do, right? God is leading. And when you know God is leading, it's just so good, right? Jacob wakes up from his dream and he's in awe and his response is this vow and God's speaking to me, promising me. And he marks the place and calls it Bethel. And then it says, Jacob lifted up his feet in the Hebrew NIV, the translation's not quite so imaginative, but it just says Jacob went on his journey. But there's this sense of he's got this lightness of step, this spring in his step as he goes on his journey. The Lord has met him. Everything's going to be okay. God is with him. And then it's amazing. God has spoken. God dramatically blessed him with this word. I will be with you. I will watch over you. I will keep my promise. I will not leave you. And then Jacob goes on the journey, and the place he gets to, he doesn't know where he is. He's got no GPS. He's got no Google Maps. He's got no location services. So he just walks up and is like, hey, where am I? Like, where are you? And he happens to be in the right place. This is the place he was looking for. And a girl walks up. This is the girl he was waiting for. Oh my goodness. And relatives, like everything just lines up. And we all have these moments at times in our life where things just click, click, click. And you're like, ow, look at this. God is working things out for me. It's amazing. How else to explain it? We use the word a God incidence instead of coincidence, or my parents like to use the word, it's a God wink from something they read. Or we used to call it providence. It's not a word we use much anymore, but it's that sense of like, God is working things out. Wow, it's amazing. Like God makes everything work out perfectly for those who love him and are called according to his purposes. I'm sure that's a verse somewhere, isn't it? We like to quote to one another. It's a misquote. But God is faithful. He is working. And if you're following the Bible reading plan, then you'll have read on Friday, not because I ordered it, but just that's how it was. On Friday, you'll have read Genesis 24. And that's a story very similar to our story. A story about Abraham trying to get a wife for Isaac. And he sends his servant to go to the very same region. Different well he ends up at, and he's sitting there and he prays. He says, Yahweh, will you help me? And then he comes up with a test, a character test for the girl he's going to try to get for Isaac. And so he comes up with this test. This beautiful girl walks up and he does the test with her. She passes and waters all his camels. And he's like, amazing. Then he gives her all this gold jewelry he had. And he brings the caravan of camels that he brought with him to the family, and he gives them gifts, and they say, yes, go with him. And it's Rebecca, Jacob's mom, who goes and ends up marrying Isaac. So that story seems a little smoother than the one Jacob's in. Jacob doesn't pray. He just is there. There's no acknowledgement of God. He's just there interacting. And he doesn't have a caravan of camels laden with gifts. In fact, he's kind of seems destitute, actually. And he goes and he has to convince them that he is the relative. And that's kind of what Laban says when he's like, okay, so you really are related to me. You are blood of my blood. And but in the midst of all of this, in spite of this story, God is faithful. I love that even though Jacob doesn't do spiritual stuff, God is still faithful. God is faithful even though he doesn't know what God is doing. Just like he woke up and said, God is in this place and I didn't know it. I think that's very much true for a lot of us. God is still working even if you don't know it. He's still working. He's there. He's faithful anyway. And we have a plan A. Usually we have a plan A. That's a long time ago, that picture. I was at the university, so I left YWAM and I went to university. And I remember the place I was standing. I remember the moment. And my friend tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned around. And in that moment, it felt like someone punched me in the stomach. And at the very same moment, the angel choir started singing Hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. And like a light shone on this most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. And she smiled and it was like just dazzling. And all I could hear was murmur, murmur, murmur. And then my friend said, John, this is Lauren. I want you to meet Lauren. And I was like, oh. And then she said, hi, I'm Lauren. And I said, ha ba 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 sa ba ba. And then she said again, hi, I'm Lauren. And I said, I am Jonathan. And I shook her hand, and then I turned around and was like, whoa. And then I went away with my friend and was like, why aren't you dating this girl? She's like the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. And he was like, I don't know, it's just weird. Sometimes it just doesn't click. And I thought, you are an idiot. And then we went off, and then the Lord started to really stir my heart. I was like, I think maybe I'm supposed to go for that girl. If you're not, you're not. Okay, I'm going to do it. And then I tried to meet her and be where she was, and there's no well at the university. So I went to the cafeteria, and I thought, I'll meet her here. And I kept watching for her, and she didn't wander up with sheep or anything. And I was like, oh, man. And then I thought, I know, a feat of strength, that'll get her attention. So I went to the gym. I knew she was in volleyball, and I started working out and watching for her. Thankfully, she didn't come because what I was doing was not impressive. So that's good. And eventually I had to call her and say, hey, will you go out for a date with me? And she said, okay. And I remember sitting across the table from her on that date, and as she talked and was very animated and had her dazzling smile, I remember thinking, this is the kind of woman I could marry. She's smart, she's beautiful, and she has a life centered on knowing and loving and following Jesus. Man, this is it. And that begins that sense many of you have experienced of the butterflies in your stomach, that sense of, like, we call it falling in love, like you just want to be with the person all the time. And this experience makes you vulnerable. Like, that's what happens with Jacob. It's like someone hit him with a 2x4 and he's vulnerable. He is, and we use the word smitten at our house. That's what Jacob was, smitten. Just the days and the years, it doesn't matter. I love her. And there is a problem, and that's what we're introduced to by the narrator in Genesis. Takes a moment to apprise us of this problem. There's a problem. The problem is verse 16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. Here's the problem. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel. So this is an epic story conflict setup here. We've got 2 sisters. One is beautiful, and one has weak eyes. Weak eyes. I'm like wondering, does that mean she needs glasses? And I don't know, or like she's hard to look at, or like what does this expression mean really? And the word is translated soft eyes or delicate eyes or timid eyes. So some people are like, maybe she didn't have the same spark as Rachel had, and you're like, we don't know. What we do know is Rachel is beautiful, and she's described that way. So let's just stick with that, because that's what we do know. And Jacob fell for younger Rachel. And the narrator here sets up the rivalry, the competition, the injustice that will come, the tragedy of their relationships that go on through their life. And we'll hear more about that in weeks to come. We all have a plan A. We've got something, you might be pretty, low-key about it or nonchalant, but deep down, we all have hopes and plans. We all have a way we think our life is going to go or work out, and our passion and motivation is to see that happen. Jacob loves Rachel, and it makes 7 years seem like a few days. He is on it. This is the plan, and he knows what's going to happen, and he's willing to work for it. Lauren and I ended up waiting, even though I knew that from that first date, we waited 3 years. And I'll tell you, it did not seem like a few days to me. It seemed very long, and I loved her a lot. But so maybe not as much as Jacob loved Rachel, I guess. But this is the issue, and we move from plan A to plan B. Maybe you're on plan D or E or further down the line. Maybe the scenario changed and something happened and plan A dies, and maybe a little part of you dies with it. What you thought would be your life, what you thought was going to happen, and you have to wrestle it through. Jacob ends up in this place. The place is introduced as being the land of the people of the East. And commentaries will tell us that this reference, people of the East, is always used to talk about people who don't know God. People who are godless or people who worship many gods. And there's this sense of danger that comes with this place, the land of the people of the East. And it's here that we encounter a new character, a new person in our story, Laban. I want you to try not to picture him on the flannel graph board, which is, if you know what that is, then you went to Sunday school before me or around the same time as me. Otherwise, you'll have to ask your parents what that is. But it's the cartoon stories, right? We get this idea of like, oh, they're cartoon. They're so happy and friendly. Look at him and look at this. I just made this up that, it's not a real picture of them. But I did put the glasses on Leah, though. And You need to picture not this, but picture Laban as like a powerful Bedouin prince or something in the sea of tents, and he's got like an entourage and men at his beck and call. It's like a city almost. He's a powerful person with a lot of power. And when Jacob comes and shares his story, he comes under Laban, and Jacob is at his mercy. Now, I'm a person, my personality is like, I can put myself in other people's shoes. I can believe the best about them. Probably this was happening or this was happening. Or maybe they did this and that's why they said it like that. And it's going to be okay. They just want the best. And I can do that. And sometimes that's helpful. And other times it's not helpful. Because sometimes people don't have your best in mind. Sometimes they're not trying to help you. Actually, maybe they're malicious. Or maybe even just mean. And maybe they're selfish or narcissistic. Maybe they missed nurture as a child, or their dad was abusive, or they've just given into evil in their heart. And the question is, what happens when a person like that is in power over you or has something on you? Jacob comes and he wants to marry Rachel, and he's beholden to Laban, or whatever he says, whatever he wants. When I asked for Lauren's hand in marriage, it went very differently than that. I was very nervous about it, and my dad kept making me more nervous because Lauren's dad was a lawyer, and so my dad kept saying, John, you're just a drama guy. Like, what are you going to say when he asks you how you're going to provide? And I'd be like, well, I'm going to talk about my character or something, I guess. And that's not good. You got to have answers for all these questions. He's a lawyer, And so I got really stressed out and was like, okay, finally, be quiet, Dad. I'm going to call. So I called him and we went for lunch downtown Vancouver. I said, don't tell anyone what this lunch is if you can. And he said, sure, okay. So we went for lunch at the Hotel Vancouver. And so I was like, okay, feeling really nervous, sat down, opened the menu, saw the prices, felt even more nervous. And he started making small talk. We're chatting away. And then at one point, finally, during the lunch, he said, well, Jonathan, I know why you've asked me here. And I said, I'm sure you do know. And then he said, it's my birthday next week. Thank you for taking me out for my birthday. And my heart dropped. I was like, oh no. And he had a twinkle in his eye. And he's like, oh, well, why did you ask me here then? And I said, well, I wanted to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. And then he did the most unexpected thing. He hit the table with his fist and said, granted. Anything else? And I was like, what? Do you have questions? He was like, do you want me to ask questions? I said, no, this is good. I'll take this. I'll take it. Jacob's experience is very different from that kind of interaction. The Hebrew language conveys some of the insult and the danger in their conversation, which we don't get. Verse 15, Laban says, just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be. And I always thought, oh, he's being nice. And they say, no, this is insulting on some level because Laban should treat Jacob kindly as a part of the family. If you're a part of the family, you don't work for wages. You're a part of the family. You're a part of the family business. So this is like treating him as a worker. And that's how he treats him all the way through. Transactional, economic relationship. We'll see it all the way through the story. And this word to work or to serve happens 7 times throughout the scene. And it's the same word that's used when it's talk about Esau serving Jacob. But it's Jacob serving Laban under this heavy yoke of working or serving or slaving away here. And we're reminded that Israel will one day serve in slavery. Jacob's life is going to take a turn because of this one person. And my question is, what about plan A? The trap is sprung, and we move into the PG part of our sermon. If we're honest, this Jacob story is hard to relate to. It's hard to connect to. It's not really our context. He's marrying his cousin, paying her dowry. He's waiting 7 years to have sex with her, which is not a cultural concept in our culture at all. He somehow marries her sister without noticing and then consummates the marriage still without noticing, and then finds out it was his other unattractive cousin, and he marries both cousin and ends up with 2 wives. If this is your situation you can relate to, I want you to meet me after the service. This is not our culture. It's not our context. And so we need to be careful imposing our experience onto this story. We do know that polygamy wasn't God's good plan for marriage. We see that bearing out through Scripture. Nor should you be marrying your cousin anymore. That's just a reality. But things go bad. There's moments and seasons in our life where plan A seems to fall apart. Maybe something goes wrong and then suddenly everything seems to go wrong and prayers go unanswered and someone turns on you. And this is that moment for Jacob. 7 years is like a few days. It's all okay. And then suddenly he's confronting Laban. His uncle seems to be holding out, making his plan, scheming. And again, this language we don't really get, but in the Hebrew they say it's very clear that Jacob says to Laban, "Give me my wife, my time is completed and I want to make love to her," which is what you hope every prospective son-in-law will say to his future father-in-law. Just like that, right? Like, wow. But the "give me my wife" is missing a please. It's missing polite language. And they say the tension is already visible. So Laban is holding out. Jacob's like, come on, what's going on? Why are you holding out? Why can't we get this wedding going? Something's going on already. And of course, in the PG version, the NIV takes the euphemism from Hebrew and makes it into our language. Make love, that's a euphemism we understand. The word is approach. I want to approach her, or the New American Standard more literally says relations. But this is how they heard it. Making love or sleeping together is in the Bible. Yeah. One person laughed. It's true. It's shocking, right? We read it and we're like, whoa, okay, wow. It's right up there. The deceiver becomes the deceived. We see Jacob fall in love with a girl and act honorably, actually. He waits and he works hard. And then everything comes off the rails. This one night is like a wedding party. We don't know exactly what happened, but maybe there's too much wine, or the wine's a little too strong, or it's nighttime in Haran and it gets pitch black, and there's likely that she's wearing a veil, and that's part of it. However it goes down, the trick works. And Jacob wakes up in the morning and says, "What in the world have you done to me? What have you done to me?" Laban's trick is to change the course of Jacob's whole life. His plans up in smoke. And he's really reaping what he sowed, isn't he? I mean, there's this principle in the kingdom about reaping and sowing. Even the world recognizes it. They call it karma. Like, what you put out is going to come back to you. The kingdom version we call sowing and reaping. Jacob tricks his father with an identity swap, and then Laban tricks him with an identity swap. Isaac says to Esau, "Your brother came deceitfully." Jacob says to Laban, "You deceived me." Same root word. The tricked becomes the trick. The tricker becomes the tricked. Laban says, "Around here we don't give the younger before the older." And he is digging at Jacob. He heard the story and he says to him, "Hey, here we don't do that. What you did, yeah, where you stole your older brother's stuff, yeah, we don't do that. So you deserve this. It's on you." But Laban's trick is to alter Jacob's whole life. He steals 7 years. He sets up the sister wives, the conflict, the pain, the favoritism, the bickering. It's all going to play out. And we could say, it's all Laban's fault. And the question comes, does God know? Where's God's favor right now? Because I don't see it. What happens when people wreck God's plans? And by that we mean our plans. Scammers, manipulators, abusers, evil people, or maybe it's the incompetent people or the negligent people. Can God use people's mistakes and deceptions and advantage taking for his purpose. Our big fear so often is that God doesn't know what's going on. Surely he must be surprised by this one, wringing his hands, wondering what to do. There's a folk tale about a poor man in a village, and he has a beautiful white stallion, a horse, and the king comes and offers to pay a lot of money for this beautiful horse, and the man says, no, I'm going to keep it. And then the townspeople come to him and say, you're a fool. You could sell your horse you would be rich in the king's favor. What are you doing? And the man says, well, it's too soon to tell. And then the man wakes up one morning and the stallions run away. And then the people come and they say, you are a fool. You would have been rich, but now you have no horse and no money. And no king's favor. You are a fool. And he says, yeah, it's too soon to tell. And then 2 weeks later, the horse returns with 3 other horses. And the people come and say, you're so smart. How did you know that? It's amazing. Wow, you've got 3 horses and you could sell one to the king now and you'd be rich beyond imagining. And the man says, it's too soon to tell. And then the next week, the man's son is on the horse training it, and he's thrown and his legs are crushed. He will never walk again. And the people come and say, oh, the cursed horse, you fool, you should have sold it to the king, and then you would have a son who could walk. And the man said, it's too soon to tell. A month later, there's a war, and all the young men are conscripted except for his crippled son. They go off, and every son from the village is killed. And in their grief, the villagers come and say, you were right, how did you know? Here you have a living son and all these horses. And the man says, it's too soon to tell. You guys, most of the time it's too soon to tell. What if someone rips me off? Or fires me, or sabotages me? What if the doctor misses something? What if things happen to change the course of my life? What if this thing is the final straw that ruins everything? By that, usually we mean our plan A. And the answer is, it's too soon to tell. In a later story, following this story of Jacob, Joseph, Jacob's son, is sold into slavery by his brothers. Oh, it's a huge long story. He goes to prison and he rises and sings and all these things happen and he rises to power and prominence and finally the father dies and all the brothers come and they kneel before him and they're worried in his power he's going to kill them and take revenge. And this is what he says to them. As for you, you meant evil against me. But God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result. And this is what you need to hear. This God is never thwarted. He's never surprised. He's never at a loss. He is always faithful. It's soft-eyed, unwanted, less beautiful Leah, who's the mother of Judah, ancestor to David, ancestor to Jesus, the one who endures the greatest injustice, which becomes the greatest victory, the cross and his resurrection. It's too soon to tell. Whatever you're going through, God is faithful. He made incredible promises to Jacob, ones Jacob should write out and memorize, and then when he's tricked into working 14 years for the woman he loves, he can reread it. Or when his uncle chases him down later with unclear intent, he can reread it. And when Esau comes to meet him with 200 men, he could reread it. And when his daughter is raped and his sons are the targets because they kill the guy, he could reread it. In the loss of wives and favored sons and famine and heartache, Jacob could reread it. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Whatever you go through, God is faithful. You might not see it now, or maybe ever, but we trust in his faithfulness. This is who he is. He is faithful. He cannot be unfaithful. Would you pray with me? Jesus, we thank you for these very messy human stories about it sound very similar to our lives. We connect to the experiences that Jacob goes through, the ups and the downs, the feeling so sure about everything and then feeling very unsure about everything. And God, we long to know deep in our core that you are faithful, to see you as you are and to trust you and to know you, and then to walk following you in this way that others have gone before. God, I think of people that have done things to us, wrongs that have been committed, things that changed our lives. And God, we believe, we trust that you are a God who redeems and restores what's lost. And you turn things for good. Somehow, we don't know how you do it, but you do. And so we trust that you're doing this work in our lives as we come to follow and surrender. Lord, help us to trust you, to love you, to see you as you are. Amen.